Hi everyone, today I'm going to be teaching you how to paint cherry blossoms using watercolour. This is a super easy tutorial and it only took me an hour and a half to complete the entire thing. So grab your paintbrushes, get that watercolour paper ready and let's paint some cherry blossoms. To begin with, I made sure I had all my materials laid out in front of me ready to go. This included 2 jars of water, pencil for the quick outline that you'll see me doing in a second, my paintbrushes, my paints and my palette for pre-mixing. I then did a really quick sketch of where I wanted my branch to be. This was really essential so I knew where to put all of my cherry blossoms that I wanted to include within this painting. So all you need to do is just put a pencil line really lightly through the paper wherever you want your cherry blossoms to be. I did a couple of little lines so I had just a general structure of where these would fall. I pre-mixed all of my colours as well so that I had a general idea of how the colours would look together as I did a little swatch to see the light pink, dark pink, things like that. I wanted to see how they worked nicely together, which then meant I could move on to getting this down on the paper. So I began with a really light pink for this painting as I wanted this to be the base layer, so the lighter the better for this, so we could add darker colour later on top of this. And as you can see, to begin with, I painted the general cherry blossom shape that I wanted, and then I blended this out using a little bit of water on my paintbrush. So I cleaned it, used that little bit of water to blend the edges of each petal out. And this was something that I really wanted to do to have more of like a mystical feel. I wanted everything to look like it was slightly blending and all bleeding in together, but you still have that distinction of the cherry blossoms. So that was really important to me for this painting. So I also blended some areas out more than others as I really wanted that blend more so within certain areas, less so within others, so there was a nice cohesive mix of everything. Some blended out more, some not, but everything still had that general mystical feel to it. I'd also recommend looking at perspective for this particular painting. Because I'm not using a reference photo, I would recommend, if you've never painted cherry blossoms before, just taking a look on maybe Pinterest and having a look through lots of different reference photos. And what this will do is it will allow you to see the general structure of a cherry blossom, and with the different perspectives looking at a flower, the general shape does change. So I tried really hard to have a mixture of looking at the flower head on, like the first one that I painted, some of them being on the sides, some pointing up, down, etc. So I really wanted that mixture between all the different flowers to give it more, not a realistic feel, but more less perfect. You've not got every single flower looking the same. It does have that nice mix and match, which I think works really well with this particular painting. Also, once certain flowers had dried that I painted at the beginning, I then went back in and overlapped some of these areas with more flowers. So the drier the paper, the more you can do this freely, and you're not going to have to worry about everything merging and not being able to distinguish between flowers. But because I wanted everything to bleed out naturally anyway, if it did still do this, I was actually quite happy with letting it be free, letting it do its own thing, seeing how it turned out. So this is down to how you want your painting to be. If you want more of a structure to it and to look a little bit more realistic, let's say, I'd wait for the paper to dry before going in and adding more flowers over the top of the ones that you've already painted. I also added a second layer of paint to some of the flowers just to darken up slightly and start to distinguish a little bit more. Again, not everything was completely dry, but I still did this and you can start to really see the distinction. And I also went in with the dark pink in the centre of all of these flowers now to really darken up, and I love the contrast between these two different shades of this pink. I love how it all bleeds out very naturally because the paint wasn't dry, and yeah, I wanted it again to have more of that natural flow to it with things bleeding out, letting it do its own thing. I then quickly went in with the brown, just so, mainly for you guys actually, just to see where the branch is, as it's quite difficult to explain because you just can't really see it on camera because the line was so faint with the pencil. So I'm just quickly mapping in where these branches fall. So I would wait on this a little bit actually if I were you guys, as you don't want it to bleed into the flowers. So I'd let it dry before painting in the branch like I have just done. So my paper is now completely dry and I'm going in with the dark purple that I pre-mixed to begin with. So I'm using this over all of that dark pink. I'm just putting a few dots down where I want that centre of the cherry blossom to be, and then you can paint very thin lines connecting all of these little dots within the centre. Now this is something that I would recommend practicing, especially if you've never used watercolour before. I'd maybe use a scrap piece of paper, just practice these dots and the lines. The dots actually should be pretty easy, but the lines can be really difficult to replicate as they are very thin and you do need to have good control of the paint. But I definitely know from experience that a little bit of practice with this is really going to help, and that is the best way to achieve these really thin lines. So before I continue with this tutorial, make sure to check out all of the links below where you can find everything related to my nature art workshops. You can find all the live classes that I offer. These usually take place on weekends to make them more accessible to you. You can also find playbacks, so if there's anything that you can't attend live, you can purchase courses that I've already recorded over on my website. You can also access my Patreon, where you can find every single tutorial, every single one that I've ever created, for a small fee of only £10 a month. So yeah, make sure to check that out. And you'll also find links to all my social media pages, TikTok, Instagram, everything is down below, so make sure you take a look and like and subscribe. Going back to the painting now, as you can see I've put down the branches using a dark brown, and I decided to blend this out similarly to the cherry blossoms. The only difference being for the branches, I decided to blend only the bottom, so the top of each branch that's pointing upwards or further towards the top of the page, I decided not to blend. I only blended underneath, as I really liked the effect that this had. It made it almost look like the shadows were blending and bleeding out, which I thought was really quite unique, so I decided to do this and incorporate it into the painting. You can also add in some really tiny branches, doing the same thing with the small strokes with the paintbrush that I mentioned earlier with the purple. And I also used the same light pink that we used to begin with to further emphasise some of the cherry blossoms. So although we blended this out to begin with, that creates a really nice background, but this is now defining the key areas, so you can really distinctly see the cherry blossom, but you've still got that blend out of the baby pink behind it that's just slightly lighter, and this works really well together to create a beautiful piece. And you can do this as much or as little as you'd like, but just be careful not to overwork the paper. And yes, you want that distinction, but you don't want to darken it so much that the centre then blends together with the outside of all of the petals. You still want that contrast between the dark centre, lighter on the outside, so yeah, just be conscious of that. Please don't overwork the paper. So all that I am now doing to finish is just tidying everything up, adding a few more branches, like I say, adding more layers to the cherry blossoms, but being careful not to overwork everything. So it's tying everything together to get it how you want it. I also used my small paintbrush to put down some paint splatters with all of the colours that I've been using. I used the smaller brush so that I could have more control over where the paint goes, because I tried to keep it more within the background so that it wasn't touching the cherry blossoms as much. And I say as much because this can be quite difficult, and I didn't want to make it perfect. I wasn't upset that things did overlap. Thank you so much for watching my cherry blossom tutorial. Really hope you've enjoyed this painting. I definitely enjoyed creating this piece. It's one of my personal favourites. It's super easy, and yeah, I really enjoyed creating this. Make sure to like and subscribe for more nature art content, and I will see you next time. Bye guys!